here. So 7.2 causes of World War I, and then 7.3 is really the kind of carrying out or how World War I happened, essentially. And so when we're talking about why, or what were some of the causes of World War I, a good acronym you may want to remember is the main causes, being militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism. When we say militarism, we're talking about the large militaries and the military technology that existed. Alliances are pretty straightforward, but it turned Europe into what's called a powder keg, basically something waiting to explode that did explode. When we talk about imperialism, we're talking about competition over global colonies and resources, and then nationalism are those nationalist movements, those national pride movements, basically, that led to unification in Germany and Italy and led to revolutions in the Balkans and led to reforms in the Ottoman Empire. You know, there was kind of different manifestations of them, but they feed into a notion of us and them, which is important to understand because that's one of the main factors. Excuse me, saying main, and I don't mean it in terms of the acronym, I actually mean one of the primary factors that leads to this conflict, because you have states very much siloed into this view that they are a people and this outside group is a different people, and then you have notions of superiority between groups and stuff like that that creates just like a kind of environment. Now, that nationalism was actually kind of fed and encouraged by states, because for the states, it was a useful tool for them in terms of controlling and motivating their people. But first of all, understand that from the CED's perspective, and just kind of factually, the probably biggest or the main primary cause, and it's, I know it's a little bit weird the way I'm saying this, but a very important cause or a very important underlying reason that we had this first conflict was simply that you had large global empires that had been competing with each other for quite a while, and by this point had controlled all the map. Again, remember, 7 flags, remember, the entire world is controlled by a very few, small group of people, basically. And there's not much left to take over. But these colonies, these overseas colonies, are a great source of wealth and strength, but wealth is a big thing for them, obviously, for these empires. And so they ran out of places to take over, essentially. I mean, I'm not saying it's that simple, but that's a very big thing that you need to understand is they had large militaries, they had large empires, they had a desire to kind of continue that expansion, but there was nowhere to expand to. Because of the existence of these large empires, states had large militaries, okay, because they were engaged in various territorial and regional conflicts that required them to have large, well-equipped, well-manned militaries. And one thing you're going to learn throughout all of your kind of history classes and probably through life is that for the most part, when states have large militaries, they're going to tend to use them, because if you don't use them, it becomes kind of hard to justify their existence. Okay, that's something you'll see criticism levied against the United States even today about our use of large military, but then you also have people pushing to use our large military just for no other reason simply than we have it. And there's a certain logic about needing to kind of use something. You know, I guess what I'm thinking of is the old you use it or lose it kind of thing, which I know is a cliche, but at the same time, it's kind of true that if you have this large military does not have a mission, does not have a purpose, it can kind of erode the abilities and the kind of strengths of that military. So that's kind of the underlying context. Now, to add on top of that context then, the fact that you had a complicated and at this point well-established alliance system. So the first alliance to know about, by the way, let me point out that the CED refers to it as a flawed alliance system, and I think that's a pretty good framing, and it may be like terminology you'll see, so I just want to make sure you understand that that's a CED kind of official kind of description of what was going on here. So the Triple Alliance, Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Italy. And that's kind of this middle section here of Europe. Now, remember, before this point, or up until this point, up until these unification movements in Italy and Germany, this central part of Europe was under one empire. Does anyone remember what we're talking about? It had kind of two names, neither was probably very accurate. for what we call that empire that was really Germany, Austria, and northern Italy? Major empire, Central Europe. Like I said, 2 words before the word empire, and neither of which are accurate when we're describing what the empire was. So you got the first word right. Holy Roman, there we go, yep. So this was the Holy Roman Empire, which was trying to be that Catholic empire, so you're on the right track there. But what I'm getting at is that background, that context makes sense then that these states would then kind of continue that alliance moving forward, because they had been in kind of a more extreme alliance before this point. They were really under one empire, under one system. We call those groups together the Central Powers. Okay, Italy's going to change sides, but we call that group the Central Powers. They were joined, remember, by the Ottomans and also then later by Bulgaria. The Triple Entente was Russia, France, and Britain, and they're kind of what's surrounding it. But I want to, point out, looking at this map again, there weren't many parts of the world that were not somehow a part of this alliance. The United States was always probably going to side more with France and Great Britain because of kind of cultural heritage and the kind of nature of the state at this time, essentially. And then remember, the U.S. is exerting its influence over South America, and the British still retain a colonial kind of presence there as well. So all of this is really on the Allies' side. I know it's a little confusing because that's the Triple Alliance, and yet the other side gets called the Allies, but you kind of just need to learn it. So think of those as the Central Powers, and that is the Allies. The Allies were joined by by Japan, which makes sense because remember, Japan was trying to westernize, and then from 1918, the Italians switched sides. They'll do the same thing in World War II, so it becomes kind of a joke, really, in history about the Italians switching sides in the war. The war then truly kind of begins with the assassination of Franz Ferdinand. So he was going to be Austria-Hungary's next leader. He was the heir apparent, or the heir in waiting to take over Austria-Hungary. On June 28th, 1914, there was actually going to be an assassination attempt, not on him, but on another Austria-Hungary official. They didn't actually know he was there, but he was. And so there was this convoy of leaders from Austria-Hungary, and it was attacked. There was a bomb, an explosion, by these Bosnian rebels that were being supported by a group called the Black Hand, a Serbian group. It's a kind of a secret military society that was Serbian in origin. But they were supporting the Bosnian rebels who were fighting against Austria-Hungary, who was ruling that part of the world at this time. So there was an attempt to blow up the motorcade. It was unsuccessful, but some people did get injured. Franz Ferdinand went to go visit those people that got injured. When he was leaving, his motorcade took a wrong turn. Really, took a wrong turn and just happened to run into, not actually like an accident, but they turn a corner basically, and the Black Hand, well, not the Black Hand, but the Black Hand supported Bosnian rebels just happened to be there. It was just completely bad luck. Gavrilo Princip was one of those rebels. He was a teenager at the time, took advantage of the opportunity, walked up and shot and killed Franz Ferdinand and his wife. This has a big impact on the relations then between these states, because now Austria-Hungary is furious at Serbia for essentially supporting this assassination of who was going to be their next leader. Okay? That starts what's called the July Crisis. During July 1914, you had states kind of across the board gearing up for war, that they were mobilizing forces. By the end of July, you have declarations of war starting. And so that's why it's the July Crisis, because all the lead up to the actual war starting happens in July. Conflict doesn't really start in July, other than, well, that was in June. But there's not really conflict, but it's getting ready for conflict. That's the July Crisis. Understand that Serbia had an alliance with Russia. Russia then has those alliances with France and Britain. France very early on made it clear that they would support Russia and therefore would support Serbia in any kind of fight that was going on. Britain was actually trying to negotiate peace at the start, but was successful in doing so. And toward the end of July, on July 23rd, Austria-Hungary delivered a series of required demands, an ultimatum to Serbia that were very unfavorable. And the kind of common wisdom is that they delivered these demands with the assumption that Serbia would decline. They were basically trying to create a pretext for war. They were trying to say, hey, we gave them a chance to not fight. They declined our chance, so now we're going to fight. But the chance they gave them was probably not an earnest one. And that comment is based on actual official statements by Austro-Hungary officials at the time that said specifically that they basically were giving them a deal they couldn't accept. So July 28, 1914 is the first declaration of war. That's Austria-Hungary declaring war on Serbia because Serbia rejected that ultimatum and said they would not kind of follow the demands of Austria-Hungary. You can see the cascading declarations of war there. And this is just a small chunk, so that there's a bunch more. This really is. This can only fit so much in one slot. So I wanted to kind of hit the highlights. Great Britain was not, no one declared war on Great Britain before Great Britain declared war on Germany. It's interesting because Germany was trying to convince Britain to stay neutral. Germany did not want to fight Britain. They really didn't. But Britain was siding with their allies, and Germany felt forced to side with their allies, and that's where the fighting begins. This little kind of diagram actually is kind of useful to show you the alliances, but then also kind of how the fighting takes place between these different groups. The Ottomans joined later. They joined with a surprise attack on Russia, which again, circling back to the idea of the history of Russian incursions into the Ottoman Empire, kind of makes sense that they